Iowa State had a massive, massive injury problem throughout the season. Within in the first, I want to say it's on the fourth snap of the game of the first game of the season. Iowa State loses Caleb Bacon, its starting middle linebacker, who was expected to be one of Iowa State's best defensive players, and maybe honestly one of Iowa State's best overall players. You lose him to a broken leg right away. You also don't have another starting linebacker in Will McLaughlin at all until you get late in the season. You're playing at Utah and things like that. You don't get Will McLaughlin until late, and you lose Caleb Bacon right away. So most of the season, you're starting a redshirt sophomore, a true freshman at middle linebacker, and a redshirt freshman at the other linebacker spot. Which anybody that knows anything about football knows if you're starting freshman linebacker and you're essentially starting three brand new linebackers because even the redshirt sophomore had not started before. He'd played some sparingly on special teams and stuff like that the year before, but had not really been a starter up to this point. And that's Cooper Ebel. He had not played much of any, much at all through the first couple of years. Expected to be a really nice player, but hadn't played at all. Then you got true freshman Kale Brazina stepping in at middle linebacker with the green dot on his helmet from day one. After game two after Caleb Bacon goes down, and then you've got a few different guys on the other side. You've got Bo Goodwin, and Rylan Barnes comes in later in the season. Um, but the injury problems did not stop at linebacker for Iowa State. Unfortunately, you had some on the defensive line. You had Dominique Orange miss some time throughout the season. You had J.R. Singleton miss some time. At safety, you had Malik Verdon, who is just has had horrible injury luck the last couple years. He played a good chunk of the season, but was just banged up the whole time. Bo Freeler was kind of a famous case that I was within the Iowa State community, anyways, of just a guy that was just banged up constantly. He, you know, as the story goes, this past offseason in the summer, he was actually encouraged by doctors to medically retire because his shoulders were so banged up and essentially have nothing. They have there's just nothing left in his shoulders. They've just been torn up so many times that he just, he's probably going to live the rest of his life not being able to pick up his arm above about here. But he chose to play the entire season because knowing that his injury issues are probably going to keep him out of the NFL. He chose to play every single snap this season, and good on him. But he was playing hurt, very hurt a lot of the season. Malik Verdon was hurt a lot of the season. Saw some injuries at corner. We saw multiple injuries at tight end. Ben Bramer missed a chunk of the season. You saw Cooper Alexander not play at all this season. Gabe Burkle stepped up and had a nice season as well. The offensive line had some issues. You had multiple starters go down at various points in the season. Jalen Travis didn't play the first few games. All this is to say is that Iowa State was a very, very banged up football team. If I remember correctly, the number I saw was outrageous. I believe it was by like the eighth or ninth game. I think it was by the time they played. I want to say it was by the time they played Utah that 105 guys had played snaps for Iowa State in 2024. If that shows you the number of guys that were injured for Iowa State this season. It was pretty unreal. By the time you're getting into those later game seasons, you're talking about Caleb Brazina, who had gotten hurt, and you have true freshman walk-on linebacker Rylan Barnes, then starting at middle linebacker for a few games. The injury problems were tenfold. It was unreal how many injuries Iowa State had. So it was kind of amazing. And frankly, it was kind of amazing that they had the season they did, and they were able to deal with the adversity that they had to deal with, and had some big wins along the way as well. But the injury issues reared their ugly head once you get to Arizona State, because you had Malik Verdon was playing with basically a robot arm because he just couldn't. His shoulders and his elbow were so banged up. Bo Freeler's banged up. You're missing tight ends. You're missing a corner. They really reared their ugly head. Arizona State, obviously, Cam Skadboo's an incredible player, and they were super aggressive. Sam Levitt's a great quarterback. Arizona deserved to win that football game, and they would deserve to win by multiple scores. But a fully healthy Iowa State, or as healthy as you can expect them to be at the end of the season, probably plays a much better game against Arizona State. But not that injuries are an excuse, but it's just context. Where this all ties into my theme for today is that there's a lot of those guys that were not available or were very, very banged up for the Big 12 championship game, and then did not play in the bowl game, or for whatever reason, that in a playoff scenario, while it would have been technically a little bit shorter rest, you would have had guys that would have played in a playoff game that just did that sat out a bowl game, like a Jaden Higgins who sat out the game against Miami. One of I was maybe arguably Iowa State's best receiver, another 1,000-yard receiver, one of the 2,000-yard receivers sat out the bowl game. Darian Porter, who was Iowa State's best special teams player and best cornerback, also sat out that game. You had multiple guys. Ben Bramer did not play that game just because of injuries. Malik Verdon didn't play because of injuries. The other the other rumor, if you want to have it called that or whatever, but the thought was that if Iowa State was playing in a playoff game, that Caleb Bacon would have been available and that Ben Bramer would have played. So a playoff Iowa State team probably has more of its starters back than it's had the entire season, essentially up to this point. And it's not the same team that played in that Big 12 championship game. So, I think it's an interesting dichotomy to look at here because it's two different paths. If you look at we'll look at both for each opponent because we don't know that they would have all come back. If we just say that the Iowa State team that played against Arizona State, let's say they get into the playoff and they can be anywhere, whether they're an at-large or they beat Arizona State or whatever it is, that team with those injuries gets into the playoff. And then we'll say, okay, let's say you do get all those starters back. How does Iowa State fare against those?